A very warm evening to one and all present here. I, Pallav Aneja, welcomes you all on behalf of Indian National Bar Association. Let's proceed to our next panel, which is on the topic US Immigration Law, Gateways into North America. The speakers of our panel are Mr. Joe McFarland, Joseph B. McFarland, PA, Susanne Leone, Leone Zhgun, PA, Chairperson, Asia Committee, Florida International Law Section. Our moderator for the panel would continue to be Sir Salman Waris, Partner Head TMT and IP Practice. Rules for the panel would remain the same. 6 minutes time for each speaker, succeeding by a question-answer round. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. I just want to introduce myself and Joe really quick so you know our background. Joe is admitted to the Florida and the New York bar, and his practice focuses on immigration and tax planning. He also has his own firm, and he works in Orlando, where his firm is and where Joe lives. And he received a BA from Princeton University, an MS in International Affairs from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. He has a law degree from New York Law School and an LLM in taxation from the University of Florida. And I'm also just say a few words about myself. I'm an attorney from Miami. I work mainly in the corporate field and the immigration, and what we do with our firm is that we help and assist international clients who want to invest or immigrate to the United States, and we assist them in the whole process from setting up their company, helping them obtaining the right visas, and finding a right strategy for them. So what we talk about today is ways for Indians to get in the United States. We will mainly focus on EB-5 visa, and also we will talk a little bit about the EB-1 and the H-1B changes that currently occurred under the Trump administration. So, Joe, I think...
Yes, so we don't have much time, so I thought we would focus primarily on the EB-5 visa. EB-5, what that means, EB means employment-based, and the 5 refers to the number of this type of category in the Immigration and Nationality Act. So EB-5 is an investor visa, and it's used for people who invest money in the United States and create jobs. It's a visa that has existed in the law since 1990, so it's been around for a while. But it really didn't take off as far as interest and people taking advantage of it until about 2009, I would say. And that would correspond to the time of when the Great Recession began with 2008. And the reason for that was the financial sector, of course, was devastated by the collapse that occurred beginning in 2008. And people who needed funds to develop properties, to build, were having difficulty finding monies to develop their projects. So the idea of taking advantage of the EB-5 program really caught on. And the EB-5 was used as a way of getting additional funding to develop projects throughout the United States. Typically, what would be done is there would be a financing whereby the EB-5 funding that would come from foreign investors would make up a certain percentage, and the percentage could vary. The developer, as an example, might put in 20%. The regular financing might make up 40%, so that's 20, 40, 60, and the remaining 40% would come through EB-5 financing. So what's involved with this? The EB-5 is basically an investment of money, and there's much of the money involved with that.
So what is the requirement? How much is the minimum investment requirement?
The investment is either $500,000 or $1 million. Typically, or that normally it's $1 million unless you qualify for the smaller amount, which is 500,000, and the 500,000 is based if you are investing in an area that's rural or where there's high unemployment, and that's how you can take advantage of it. But what applies to both the $500,000 investment and the $1 million investment is that you create 10 full-time jobs during this qualifying period. That has to be shown. And full-time means 35 hours or more.
And we should also not forget that these days, even in downtown Miami, we have high-rise buildings coming up that qualify for the 500,000 in investment.
Yes, it's a quirk of the system, because to qualify for the 500,000, it has to be in what's known as a targeted employment area, a TEA. Now, the targeted employment area is an area where there's high unemployment. And what does that mean? That means it's at least 150% of the national unemployment rate, or if it's in a rural area, meaning outside what's a metropolitan statistical area, or outside of a town where there's less than 20,000 people. So the question is, well, why are there so many projects in Miami, and why so many projects in New York or Orlando, for example? And the reason is because the determination of a targeted employment area is made by the state. It's not done by the Immigration Service. It's not done by the Department of Commerce. It's done at the state level. So the state determines whether this area is going to be or falls within the targeted employment area. Now, to fall within this category, this preferred category, you need to, or what is done is, it's almost a form of gerrymandering. You create your own shape or form for the area. So the area can take quite unusual shapes, where it would include areas that where the investment is to take place, as well as other areas where there's high unemployment, let's say, or it's rural. So that's the technique that's used, and it's used quite frequently. It's used throughout the United States, and in fact, there's some proposals to either take that decision-making power away from the state and give it to a federal agency.
So Joe, now I'm sure a lot of us are wondering how many EB-5 are issued every year. Is there a chance to get that EB-5?
Oh yes,
and get that
yes.
green card?
There, as I said initially, it was underutilized, but that has completely changed. There are 10,000 visas that are available, but what this actually means is not that there's it's actually less than 10,000 from a standpoint of the practical impact, because in issuance of the visas, they include family members. So if you've got 10,000 total worldwide, and let's say in one family you've got 4 members, actually you've got a much smaller number. In fact, realistically speaking, there are about 3,000 available per year. And historically, the main user of the EB-5 visas was China. And that was the case up until quite recently, until about 2016, 2017, it's completely changed. So now there's a huge waiting list for China.
So if I'm now an Indian and I would like to immigrate in the US using the EB-5 visa, how long is the backlog right now? How long is my waiting period to obtain the green card and I can finally move?
Right. Well, right now there's no waiting list. The visa bulletin, which is issued by the Department of State, shows that there's not a waiting list as compared to, let's say, China, where China, the waiting list goes to 2014. So it's very, very difficult. It's basically on ice as far as Chinese investors right now. But for India, it is still current. Now that can change next year. In fact, the Department of State has projected that there might be a waiting list for India because there are more and more investments from India in the EB5 program.
That means you would recommend if anyone is planning as of now, we should prepare documents fast
I think I think it definitely should be considered, yes, because there's another factor involved with that. It's not only the number of applications for the EB5 from India, but also the investments itself. The investments themselves are growing to the extent where you do need to have the people make the investments now. So I would definitely encourage that. If they're, but they have to consider the type of investment and what type of EB5 visa we're talking about. So I think that's really the next.
yes.
What is an EB5 investment?
Exactly. What different kind of investments can the Indian national do under the EB5?
Yeah, when we're looking at the EB5, the investment, you really have to divide it into two categories. One is the a regional center, other is a direct investment. A direct investment, as the term suggests, means you invest directly in the United States. The person would come to the United States, find an investing in a new commercial enterprise. That's a technical term that's used, meaning an enterprise that was set up after 1990, and investing either $500,000 or $1 million in this project, and prove that after 2 years, 10 full-time jobs had been created. That's the direct investment.
Okay.
Now there's the other approach is through a regional center. And a regional center,
I just wanted to ask you, what is a regional center
right,
exactly? So
yeah.
what can
A regional center is an approved organization whereby funds can be invested through this entity to develop certain projects. And regional center has to be approved by the Immigration Service using Form I-924, and it takes at least a year to approve it. There's a lot of, to get the approval, there's quite extensive documentation that's required, and that's really the basis for the regional center itself. However, I would point out that a regional center does, even though it's approved by the USCIS, which is the Immigration Service in the United States, does not mean that it is a guarantee or that it necessarily has the seal of approval. It's approved from a procedural standpoint, but from a business standpoint, whether it will succeed, there are no guarantees. That's why it's very important for anyone, exactly, for anyone who wants to invest in a regional center, that they do the due diligence that is necessary, meaning they really have to ask a lot of questions.
They have statistics, you can get them from them, and you can really get
yes, and you have to check around. Remember also that regional centers, there are quite a few throughout the United States, and they've grown in number dramatically. In 2010, I think there was something like 100, and now there are more than 850 in the entire United States. So you've got a lot of choice, and you really have to use care, use common sense, and approach it. It's a business investment. It's a way of getting a permanent resident visa. Remember, it's a permanent resident visa. It's not temporary. It's permanent.
And we also heard over the last year, I mean, many times that the Trump administration is planning to raise the investment amount won the 500,000 in addition the 1 million. So are you
Yes.
expecting that anytime soon?
It will come. It's been debated back and forth.
Yes.
It's been debated on Capitol Hill. I know the Immigration Service wants to increase it,
Mhm.
and that's another reason to make a decision sooner rather than later. We don't know. The amount may increase to as much as $1,800,000. There's quite a range. That's really the high end.
And I mean,
But
right now we have uncertainty, so we don't know where it's going, when it will come, the change. So
Yeah, we don't know when it will, but we would expect it to occur. I would say next year. The program itself needs to be renewed in December 7th. It most likely will be, but there are a lot of moving parts in this decision as far as increasing the amount. It's political, and these are interesting political times in the U.S. Congress. So we'll simply have to see. But I would say if you combine the high probability that the amounts that have to be invested will increase, you combine that with the increased number of investments through EB-5 worldwide, and the fact that the EB-5 category for Indians is current at this time, that would be encouragement.
So we hear often it's a critical issue here with the source of funds, that this is for Indian very interesting. How to prove that, or how is the procedure with that, Joe? Or what do I need to show?
The
for the
EB-5 is it's a little unusual the way it works because it's a two-step process. It's initially what's filed is a I-526, which is the initial petition to get the designation as a permanent residence.
Mhm.
And it's conditional, meaning you have to, that's not the end of the story. Another petition has to be filed 2 years later, called the I-829, and that's really the moment of truth, because the Immigration Service will then review all of the documentation to see, A, have the 10 employees been hired, and is the capital that's invested, is it still there? That all has to be.
How do you prove that job creation? You were just talking about that you need those 10 employees. How does that work?
As far as the documentation, it's generally to answer that question, you really have to look at whether it's a direct investment or a regional center.
Mhm.
I mean, the actual documentation itself would be through your, tax documents, for example, financial accounts, that fairly standard documentation. But the direct investment, it's pretty clear. 10 employees means 10 full-time employees. It's straightforward. But when we're talking about a regional center, that's a whole different story, because it's actually one advantage of a regional center, because you can include jobs that are indirectly created, or we call induced. So you look at factors as what economic impact does this investment have, and how many other jobs, not necessarily with the project itself, but elsewhere in the community, how many jobs are created. How is that done? Part of the initial application is showing, and this is for the regional center, there has to be an economic study showing that, on this projected, based on the investment, we project that so and so jobs are going to be done. Now, this has to follow certain requirements. It just can't be made up. It has to follow certain statistical parameters.
So as you see, the EB-5, it is quite a complex complex process,
It
but
i-
I think you just need to find, I mean, once you're interested, you would just need to find some attorney in the United States who can guide you through the whole process if you're interested in investing. And I think it's also the two of us will be, later we will be around, so if any one of you have questions, I just know that we have only a few minutes left, that's why I want to wrap this a little
Yeah,
up
time
and-
goes by.
and-
There are a
and-
lot of other things we could, I would be interested in
Exactly.
talking about, like the H-1B, changes in H-1B, which have actually made things a little more
I
difficult.
think you can have, we can talk a few minutes about the H-1B and the EB-1, the
Yeah,
changes
the
before
EB-1,
we-
there is a waiting list. There is a waiting list on EB-1 for India. The only point that I would make there, I don't have time to go through the requirements. EB-1. EB-1 means alien of extraordinary ability. These are people who have basically risen to the top or close to the top of their fields, and it's a permanent resident visa. And the main comment that I would make there is that sometimes in trying to show that you're at top of your field, it makes sense to really plan carefully to define what field are you at the top of. For example, let's say if here, we're attorneys, if you say, top of your field is attorney, what does that mean? So you could say, well, how about top of the field is a tax attorney? Well, that's still too general. How about state income tax? Well, how about Florida state in other words, or in this case, you're from Germany, so it would be from, let's say one of the state of the lands there,
Yes.
a specialist in that. So
It needs
the
to be
question is
very
how to be as narrow as possible, while still being realistic about it.
Mhm.
And that way, your chances of getting that status, which is a very nice status to have, the EB-1, because you don't have to have an offer of employment. You can self-petition. That would be my own comment about the EB-1. The H-1B, just a few pointers there. I would say that by and large, and it applies not just to H-1B, but to the USCIS approaches to immigration applications in general, is that they're becoming a lot tougher. And that is reflective of the administration policy. Just to give you an example, I was looking at some statistics recently on requests for evidence. A request for evidence is a request for further documentation that is sent after the initial application is filed. It's a request for evidence, or RFE. And according to these statistics I saw, the percentage of applications that had RFEs increased from 23% in the third quarter of fiscal year 2017 to 69% the following quarter. So basically, when you're using the H-1B, you can pretty well count on getting an RFE, which just leads to the delays. Immigration now also has taken the policy that they don't even have to bother with an RFE. If they don't like what they see, boom, denied. And that's a problem with H-1B because the H-1B, the number of H-1Bs is very limited. And it's filed usually in April for jobs beginning in October, and for the past number of years, it's always been subject to lottery.
Yeah,
So
and I think we have one more alternative, and there's we also have the L1 visa category,
yeah,
which we
you could talk.
exactly. Do we have a few minutes?
Okay.
Okay. I think
Just
we can-
briefly, yeah.
Yeah, we can just briefly also say something about the L1 since we have a little more time.
Okay.
here.
Do you want to talk about it, or okay? Okay. Well, basically, the L1 is an intercompany transfer petition, and it's unlike the E2 investor visa, it can apply to any country. It's basically for persons who are in an executive or supervisor managerial position in a country, India, working with a company, has been an employee there in a higher position for the last one of the last 3 years, and then is transferred to the United States to work for an affiliate or subsidiary of the foreign company.
And the big advantage of this visa category is that it is much cheaper than the EB5 alternative.
Yeah, there's investment is not the, oh, it's a different sort of investment because, I mean, ideally you would have a company that's already been established there. You can have an L1 that is
Exactly.
brand new. Of course, you've got, that has to be set up, so there's obviously some sort of investment there, but it's not subject to a set amount of like 500,000 or $1 million. It depends on the business
It's
that we're
quite
talking
flexible,
about.
yes.
The L1, the more complex factors really typically involve how many employees are there, the structure of the employees, the type of job, the managerial or executive position that's going to be filled, what is the job duties. Those all have to be answered, and immigration is very tough about that. L1 is also where an area where one could expect the request for evidence. RFE is almost like standard procedure, but it is definitely a viable alternative.
It is, exactly. If you have an existing business in India, it is a good alternative to the EB5 visa that
Yes.
many of you, we often find out that are not aware of this visa option.
Yes, I mean, and there are other visas too that we haven't mentioned, but there is an O1 visa as well, but that's a temporary visa, and it's for people who it's analogous to the EB1, alien of extraordinary ability. So people who have really accomplished a great deal in their particular field, but it's a temporary visa. But it's something to consider because under the new administration, the way the H-1Bs are being processed now, they're trying to treat the H-1B as for those who are among the quote, best and brightest, quote unquote, which actually is not what the H-1B. The H-1B is a specialty occupation, and one doesn't have to be at the top of the class to get an H-1B.
So it's really very individual, and I think it's a case-by-case decision what visa might be the best option for you. So I think you cannot even give a specific answer, or like we can just give you like a general overview, but then we really need to see your situation to see what visa. Maybe it's an investment visa, maybe it's according to your education,
Yeah,
whatever.
right. I mean, there
will
are
fit in
there are a
your
lot of
specific
factors
case.
too, and
Yes.
because the immigration decision is also linked quite often with tax decisions. There was an early presentation made today about taxation, and sometimes the right immigration choice doesn't necessarily fit with the best tax choice, and there has to be some compromise or at least when the person makes a decision, it's with open eyes to
Exactly.
understand what the consequences are. And sometimes you can make investments in the United States and you may not necessarily need a permanent resident visa, for example. It depends what one wants
Exactly,
to do.
and it also always depends from what standpoint. Is your primary goal to immigrate? Is your primary goal to do business? You always need to plan, like you said, have a pre-immigration planning set up with tax, corporate, individual tax, the corporate tax that comes later
Mhm.
on.
Yeah.
There are many factors to consider. I think
Okay, I think.
I would like to invite Ms. Nandini Gaur, Senior Partner, Karanjawala and Company Advocates, to felicitate our speakers with memento.